Welcome everyone to today's conversation, Law School and the Legal Profession, and we're so excited that you've joined us. I'm Jason Bauer-Clapp, Associate Director of Smith's Lazarus Center for Career Development, and I'm happy to introduce you to Smith alums Nima Eshghi, Assistant Dean at the Center for Co-op and Career Development at Northeastern University School of Law, and to Laura Fisher, Assistant Dean of Career Services at Western New England University School of Law. And I want to thank Laura and Nima, both of you in advance for sharing your time and your advice today. And I also want to give a quick nod to current senior Caroline Smith for your efforts in making this event happen. So thank you all. And I know our panelists have a lot of information they want to share with you today, and there's going to be time for you to ask questions via the chat during the second half of this session. So with that, I'm going to hand off to our presenters.
Sorry, of course I was muted. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. And I know that Laura and I would like to start by thanking Jason, everyone in the Lazarus Center, and Smith Senior Caroline Smith for helping us put this together. This is something that Laura and I, who are colleagues in a way, we were both Smith alums, we work at different law schools, but in the same function, running our career services and professional development departments. We've talked for a while about wanting to partner to reach out to Smith students who are interested in legal careers. As Jason mentioned, I'm a 1987 alum of Smith College. I actually majored in government and went on from there to get a master's in political science and a law school degree from Northeastern University in 1996. And Laura, do you want to introduce your credentials, and then we can each talk a little bit about our careers before we move on to the poll?
Sure. As mentioned, my name is Laura Fisher. I was born and raised in Western Massachusetts, so I saw that some of you are in Northampton. I currently live in East Hampton, so hello to those of you who are nearby. I am a 2009 graduate of Smith College. I studied English language and literature, and after Smith College, I worked for 4 years and then ultimately obtained my law degree from Western New England University, which is right here in Western Mass in Springfield. And so, Nima, do you want me to just give a little bit of background about where I've worked?
Yeah, why don't you, I didn't do my practice history yet. Why don't you do your practice history, and then I'll talk about my practice history. And go on.
Yeah, I'll go first because mine is a little bit shorter.
That's only because you're young and I'm old.
So as I mentioned, after Smith College, first of all, I graduated in 2009, which was a really tough time to graduate from college. It was really hard. I, at points, was working a few different jobs. Ultimately, about 7 months after graduation, I landed with a law firm in Amherst, a small firm for attorneys. And I worked there for 4 years before deciding to go to law school. I also, while in law school, I tried on a bunch of different hats. I interned with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I did a clerkship with Judge Ariane Viono of the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and I was able to help her draft decisions. And ultimately, after law school, I went into private practice at a large firm in Hartford, Connecticut, where I focused on tax, employee benefits, and education law. The firm that I worked at represented most of the boards of education in Connecticut, so I dealt with pretty much all legal issues that pertained to educational institutions. Ultimately, I decided to go back to the law school I attended, and I every day love meeting with students, and I love coaching them through their legal careers, helping them sort of navigate the processes. And I'm really happy to see so many people on this call who are potentially interested in law school. It just gives me a lot of hope. So that's my background. I have about 3 years of practice under my belt. I also do a lot of pro bono work still. I work with, I do remote immigration work. I prepare things for folks at the border to get out of detention. And I also do a lot of civic engagement. I'm very involved in my community. So I see that as part of, using my law degree as well. So, Nima?
Laura, that was a great segue in terms of using your law degree for other things. I do want to start by saying I think that Laura and I and our work together is actually a testament to the Smith network. Obviously, we graduated from Smith more than 20 years apart. We did not know each other until we connected professionally, but that Smith connection was immediate and has created a wonderful synergistic colleague relationship. So I went to Smith. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated, but I did take the LSAT my senior year, which is something we'll talk about a little bit more, but I felt that I wasn't ready to go to law school right away. For a variety of reasons, I thought I wanted to be an academic, so I went off to the University of Washington in Seattle to a political science PhD program, but within a couple of years, after earning a master's in political science, I learned that academia was not really for me, because as much as I loved academia and loved my academic experience at Smith, I tend to be a sort of practical, solutions-oriented, roll up your sleeves, how do we solve this problem kind of person, and that was much more suited, I discovered, to the practice of law. So returned to the East Coast. I'm a New York native. I applied to law schools in the New York and Boston area. I was really pleased with what I saw at Northeastern, which was a practical-based program where you cycle through by doing co-ops. Having been in the classroom for a lot of years, right? 4 years at Smith and then 2 years in graduate school, I was ready to get out and do some work. I loved law school, and I did a number of internships, which all of you will have available to you if you go to law school, a variety of internships. I did one with a government agency, the U.S. Attorney's Office. I did one with a legal services center where I worked with single mothers and children living with HIV and AIDS. This was in the 1990s. I worked for a federal judge, and I worked for a large law firm. Graduating from law school, I was a law clerk for the Supreme Judicial Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, which for me, and shout out to my first generation folks on the call, and a first generation college and law student, and so to go work for the highest court in the state was a huge honor. Although every day, and we can talk about this in subsequent conversations, every day when I went to work, I had imposter syndrome. Why am I here? How did I get this job? What is going on? But it really launched my career. I worked for a large Boston firm after that. After my children were born, one of whom is a Smithy, the law firm life became a little unwieldy for me and my spouse. Both of us were in the law firm world. And I stepped back and had my first tour of duty in academia, where I became a staff attorney and clinical instructor at Harvard Law School, where I supervised law students doing clinical work in the legal services setting. I went back to a law firm for several years after that, where I was the director of professional development, which in some ways is not that unrelated to what I do now, where I supervised and mentored and did professional development training for all the summer associates and brand new lawyers right out of law school. I've always had a yen for public interest. I think we're going to talk a lot about how there's a lot of paths in the legal career. And I was also very involved in the LGBT and HIV/AIDS civil rights movement, both before and during and after law school. So when the opportunity arose, I went and became a staff attorney at GLAAD, Gay Lesbian Advocates and Defenders in Boston. I was at GLAAD for just about 5 years, in addition to having served on their board of directors before that, which is another way you can be civically engaged as a lawyer, and had the blessing and opportunity to work on major cases at GLAAD, including the case that went to the Supreme Court and brought down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. But fast forward to today, I've always had that interest in students, undergraduates, law students, professional development. Given my own experience as a first-generation student, I know how much mentoring and alumni relationships and really being given the insight to understand what are these careers about, what are the steps I need to take, are really fundamental for all law students, for all Smith students, for all students considering law school. And I like to be part of the process of helping students understand what's out there. I worked for 7 years at Harvard Law School before coming here in career services there, and I'm in the beginning of my 4th year as assistant dean for career development at Northeastern. I serve on a couple of Northeastern committees. I'm sure that Laura serves on a lot of committees too. I serve on the trans and non-binary task force. I'm the faculty advisor to the South Asian and Middle Eastern Law Students Association, and then on a bunch of other committees that are much more boring that you don't want to hear about. We wanted to, after we talked at length about ourselves, and maybe I talked at too much length, do a poll and learn something more about you. So Laura, would you feel comfortable introducing the poll?
I don't have it right in front of me. Do you have it right in front of you?
I think Jason.
Oh, there it is.
Sorry about that. My fault, Laura.
Yep.
Oh, it's okay.
Just popped it up.
There we go. Okay, so there are 3 questions here. The first one being, let us know what your major is. And then the second is asking you what you think is the best major for people who want to pursue law school. And the third question is things I have heard about law school. So take a second to fill out that poll, and we will get back to it.
No need to overthink it. No wrong answers. I can't see the results. I think probably Jason can.
Yes, let me, I'm hoping everybody had a chance to weigh in. So let me end the poll and see if I can share the results. All right, is it coming up for people?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Did people see it? So I think that this is a really wonderful spread. I'm particularly thrilled to see that 43% are none of the above. And that is because some of the ones that we listed, you know, at the initial for government, for example, where there's 33%, there's often a misnomer that you must major in one of these things. And just as many students come to law school having majored in a full range of things, everything from Mandarin to music to studio art. One of my most successful classmates in law school had been a studio art major as an undergrad.
And there are very specific and unique opportunities for people who have that STEM background as well. So it's certainly not preclusive to not have studied English or government, although we do have some advice that we will share about if you're not in one of those typical sort of majors, how you can develop your skills and get relevant experience regardless. So I agree with Nima. Of course, I see people from political science and government backgrounds and English and history backgrounds. And I think that as a former English major, I think that those are, of course, very strong ways to start off on this path, in part because what you're doing within one of those majors is often a lot of critical analysis, a lot of reading, writing, researching. As a lawyer and as a law student, you're going to be doing a lot of research, writing, and critical analysis. And so, yes, those majors are good. They are good preparation. And I did find that my background studying English at Smith was very helpful because I was used to writing a lot of papers. I was used to writing concisely and clearly, and I had learned at Smith to be a strong writer. So I think to the extent that whether you are in one of those majors or even within, you know, a STEM major, I think it's really important to develop those abilities, right? And so when Nima and I were speaking yesterday about skills to develop, we were specifically talking about making sure that you have a lot of intensive experiences with writing, or at least strong experiences with writing. And that could mean if you are, you know, an engineering major, maybe stepping out of your comfort zone and taking a class or two where you are doing that sort of critical analysis, research, and writing. So even if you're not in one of those majors that's commonly associated with pre-law, there are ways to prepare yourself.
Absolutely. And then the other piece of that is that when you're thinking about writing and your writing experience, it's great to have any kind of writing experience, creative, nonfiction, but if you have had at least one course where the focus is on researching and producing a paper where you have to demonstrate your sources and tie some sort of argument or persuasive position together and try and convince your reader, that would be a great type of writing. Again, any type of writing is valuable when coming into law school. But if you do have the opportunity to take a class where you're doing the type of writing where you need to exercise the powers of reason and persuasion in the written word, that's a great thing to do. And any student can do that in any major, particularly at a school like Smith where there aren't distribution requirements holding you back from what you can take. I wanted to flip back to the third. So we went through the majors question. Every major is valuable. We now see majors much more so than 20 years ago from every different, yes, you see a lot of government, English, sociology, psychology, but I will tell you the number of STEM majors, the number of art majors, people who have health sciences backgrounds are shooting right up, and there is no evidence at all that they are less prepared for the rigors of law school. There's no bonus points you get for having had a certain major or not in terms of your preparedness. I wanted to go to the third question that I was really disappointed to see that nobody thought law school was going to be fun. Not a single person thought law school was going to be fun. A big chunk of you thought it was going to be completely miserable. Let's press pause on that for a minute. About a third of you thought you should know what you want to do before you go to law school. Now that is a common misnomer. I have students every year come to me in the very first week of law school and say, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be here. I was sitting next to someone in class. This was back when class was in person, but I was sitting next to someone in class who told me that they already have worked at a law firm. They know that they want to practice bankruptcy law and they're going to take all those classes and they're on a sort of particular path. There are those people. There are those people in life, and there are certainly those people in law school. There is nothing wrong with arriving at law school knowing that you have a commitment to working in immigration, bankruptcy, racial justice, what have you. However, it is just as common, and perhaps more common, to not be certain what you want to do. And law school actually provides a very good, the first year of law school has a very sort of intensive gen ed quality to it. Everybody around the country is taking the same classes. Everyone is studying criminal law, constitutional law, tort law, which is personal injury, property, which dovetails with the environment and ownership rights and intellectual property. Everybody is doing that same basic curriculum in their first year of law school with the flair or mission of law school, but it's the same coursework. It is often through that process that students begin to narrow down. You may come to law school and say, I'm interested in racial justice. Okay, but what does that mean in practice? It could mean becoming a public defender, or it could mean going and being a staff attorney for the NAACP, or it could mean becoming a judge and trying to adjudicate cases that come before you fairly with regard to the issues that you care about. There's no sort of shortcoming of what you could do if you're interested in racial justice, immigration, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, corporate responsibility. There are so many different areas. So set that aside. If you think that you shouldn't go to law school because you don't know what you might want to pursue in the law, don't, because most students arrive in law school the same way. By contrast, if you know what you want to do, that is fine too. It is absolutely fine to know what you want to do and to select a law school based on matches to those interests. But in general, it's not something you should concern yourself with. In terms of law school being fun, I think this is part of what Laura and I also want to convey to you. If you pick your law school correctly, if you make the right match for you, you will have fun in law school. I loved law school, and I know many other people who did too. Law school is hard. Law school is extremely hard. It is extremely demanding. However, hard and demanding don't always contradict the ability to have fun. And you will meet other people who share your passions. There will be law school activities, affinity groups, practice area groups, and it can be a fun time. Laura, your thoughts on that?
I agree. And just to speak to what Nima said about, I often have students coming in directly out of college or even, a few years out who have that very specific, like, I want to be a public defender, or I want to be a prosecutor. And yes, sometimes that they do follow that path, but also like there are people who come in knowing that, who are exposed to something else during law school, and then they decide that what they originally thought is no longer the best fit for them. I'm thinking of someone off the top of my head who really wanted to be a prosecutor, but has learned a lot about the housing issues in this state and country. And housing law is a big issue right now, and there's going to be a lot of litigation. There are going to be a lot of issues to discuss, especially in light of COVID. And so this student has pivoted quite a bit and is now really interested in clerking with a housing court judge. So even if you come in with one sort of commitment, it's not fatal to remain open and sort of see what else is out there as well. Because I do get the people who are very, narrow in what they think they want, who still eventually change their minds. So I think what Nima said about finding the right match for you and being authentic in that search and being authentically yourself in law school is what will help you. The people I know who are unhappy in and after law school are often the people who have sacrificed some portion of their authenticity or are, pursuing something that may not be the best fit for them initially. So I think that you certainly do not need to know what you want to be when you grow up to go to law school. Really, there are so many ways to utilize a law degree, more than just the typical things you see on TV or read about. There are people who go on to political lives. There are people who are, and a lot of Smithies I meet are like this, who are very public interest oriented and want to work for a service organization or a nonprofit. So there's a huge range of ways you can use a law degree. So no, I agree that you do not need to know what you want to be with your law degree to consider law school. I would just say, be yourself and be authentic in the search.
A lot of my my classmates, because of my generation and my era, a number of my Smith classmates who were lawyers in the mid 2000, in the earlier 2000s, pre-Trump, actually many of them pivoted and worked in government service. A number of Smith alums with law degrees worked for the Obama administration in a variety of key posts. I think because we promised we would save a lot of time for questions and we want to go through some fundamentals of the law school application process, we're going to just list off some resources that you should be aware of when looking at your options for law school. So first of all, think geographically about where you think you'd like to be. It is true that having geographic flexibility is good in some respects, but it's also true that if you think that you want to live in or practice law in the Pacific Northwest or the Southeast or the Midwest, check out the law schools there and where they pump people out to. Look at where the alums of those different law schools in different regions are going, because it doesn't just matter whether you're at NYU or the University of Wisconsin at Madison or UCLA or any of those places. It also matters, are 90% of those people staying put in California? If so, and you want to have a strong alumni cohort, then you probably don't want to go to that school if you think you're going to practice law for the rest of your life in Atlanta, Georgia. Again, it's not that you have to make all the decisions about exactly what city you're going to live in and exactly what law you're going to practice before you go to law school, but law schools do have a strong regional footprint. That is even true for your top 20 Ivy League types of law schools. And when I say that, what I mean is, obviously, if you go to Yale Law School, you can get a job in any part of the country. But remember that while you're in law school, you're also doing internships, you're doing externships, you are, doing community engagement, work in the community, you're doing volunteer work. A lot of our students went out and did low-income tax support around tax time for folks who can't afford tax assistance. So some of our tax students went out and did that. So you're going to be doing that type of stuff in law school, by and large, in the communities where you're attending law school. So think about where you want to be doing that stuff, because where you do those things, where you do those internships, externships, co-ops, whatever your law school calls them, is also where you're going to build connections. So an example that I will give that Laura and I discussed yesterday is I mentioned that I went to Seattle for graduate school. Because I'd gone to Seattle for graduate school, I was technically at that point a Washington State resident after several years, even though I am from the Northeast. I could have gone to the University of Washington Law School, which is a fantastic law school. The University of Washington Law School is a wonderful regional West Coast school. If you are from that area or want to live in that area, I highly recommend it. But I looked at the fact that at that time, again, this was 20 years ago, more than 90% of the alums of the University of Washington Law School ended up working in Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, or throughout Washington state. Again, wonderful. If that's what you want to do, that's fabulous. I knew I wanted to migrate back to the East to be near my family. So for me, as good of a law school as that was, and even if it was higher ranked or whatever by US News and World Report, it wasn't going to help me achieve my goals of starting a legal career in the Northeast near my extended family. So these are the kinds of things to just look at and be aware of. There's publicly available ABA data on every single school. The ABA is the American Bar Association. There's publicly available ABA data on every single law school's website. It is mandatory. According to our licensing organization, the American Bar Association, we have to publish this. And it publishes what percentage of students go into the private sector, what percentage of the students go into the public sector, and where people geographically end up practicing the sort of split of 40% are in the Northeast. It's not going to give you city by city, but it's going to give you regional breakouts. And then the other thing it does is it tells you the job placement rate and the bar pass rate. So you look at the bar pass rate and the job placement rate, and you think, you know, are these a good match to me? Do I feel confident going into this law school? So those are some of the ways to explore and research law schools. I think Laura will mention the pieces of the application, such as the things you might be wondering about, like the LSAT letters of rec.
Yeah, so just to dovetail with what Nima said a little bit about doing your due diligence on law schools, I also strongly encourage you to look past the marketing of the schools and look at those outcome reports. As Nima said, each law school is required to report on, 10 months out where all of their graduates are ending up, or at least the top 3 jurisdictions, right? So I would say look at the reports that the law schools have to publish and get a breakdown of where people are ending up afterwards, how they're passing the bar, whether they're passing the bar in, what percentages. And really look beyond the marketing of the school at those reports, because those are going to be your baseline for everywhere. As far as materials for law school, I will say that I was, as a student, surprised to see how much emphasis was placed on the LSAT. And my advice is to prepare for it. I believe that it's a test that rewards studying. And there are a number of free and low-cost options out there. I believe there's one called Khan Academy that has some LSAT prep components to it. So I would say this is not a test that you should take lightly. And the better you perform, if you're someone like me who's looking at merit-based aid to subsidize your way through law school, just knocking it out of the park or doing as well as you can on the LSAT is a really important piece. As far as recommendation letters go, if you are a current student, and even if you think that you're going to take some years off before you apply to law school, get on your professor's radars now, right? So speak to your advisor, speak to the professors that you have the best connection with. Let them know about, your idea that you might go to law school, and just sort of stay on their radar and say, I'm thinking about law school, talk through your resume with them. And then that way, when you ask for a recommendation letter later on, they already know that this was part of your plan, and it sort of sets you up to keep in touch with them, even if you're not applying directly after college, okay? So part of law school, as Nima said, is networking. And so you really should be thinking about this now as well, networking with employers and with professors, and making sure that you're establishing those connections so that you have people to speak very strongly about your skills, abilities, your persona when you're ready to apply. It's way better to put that grain in their brains right now than reach out in a few years and say, hey, I hope you remember me. Do you want to write me a law school recommendation? So think about law school also in terms of the network you're building. I know that, as Nima said, the law school you go to, where you do your externships, the community that your law school is in, that's where you're going to build a lot of your network just by default, right? By doing externships, by participating in clinics. And so really think about, even starting now, how you want to manage that network, right? And even if right now it's just getting on your professors' radars about the possibility of you going to law school, and sort of just teeing them up for, hey, I might ask you for a recommendation next year. That's a really good idea.
I think also, the other thing you can ask faculty members when you're currently enrolled students and you're trying to get support from them to go to law school is ask them if they've had prior students, alums who've gone to law school, where they've gone, what experiences they've had. You know, even if they're still in touch with them, it might put you in touch with them. I also wanted to say another good way to learn about law schools, and this is something you can start now, and it's easy. It's sort of a passive activity. It won't take up a lot of your time. Do a little bit of research into law schools you may have heard of or think that you're planning to attend, would like to apply to, or law schools in cities where you want to live. Start following several of those law schools on social media. I would cap it at I would start with between 3 to 5. I really would not go farther than that because you're going to start to get confused who's pushing out what message. But pick 3 to 5 law schools, and you can use whatever filter you want to pick them. Some people like to say okay, here's one that's going to be really hard for me to get into. Here's one I feel really good about, like the old college application process, like the stretch, the medium, and the safety. You can do it that way, or you can do it, well, these are the 3 cities I'm thinking about living in. You could do it based on those cities. But 3 to 5 law schools, follow them on social media. Follow them on Instagram, follow them on Twitter, follow them on LinkedIn. Follow them on LinkedIn if you have a LinkedIn profile, and if you don't, that's a different subject, but you should have a LinkedIn profile if you're considering law school. And I'm sure that's something the Lazarus Center can help you with. But that'll give you a sense of what the law school is doing out in the community. They will often feature students or alums who are doing interesting things. They will often feature new coursework or new programs that they're rolling out. So it's a really good way to get bite-sized pieces of information as opposed to having to sort of plow through an entire website when you're busy students. I know we want to get to the questions, and we had a few other topics to cover. I have one thing to say about the LSAT, which is very important, which is do not ever be discouraged by your first time LSAT score. It is very common, and frankly, much more common than not, to take the LSAT multiple times. Most students in law school have taken the LSAT 2 or 3 times, and occasionally more than that. So your first LSAT, unless you're somebody who tests extremely well, knocks it out of the park the first time, fantastic, go you. But the majority of law school students are not that. It is a test you can study for and do better at. I've never heard of somebody not doing better the second time. I mean, I'm sure there is cases, but not doing better the second time than the first time. So keep at it. We talked about research and writing classes. We talked about connecting with Smith lawyer alums. The other thing is there is a Smithy Lawyers Facebook group that if you're on Facebook, you can join. You can request to join the Smithy Lawyers Facebook group, and it is Smithy lawyers and students interested in legal careers. So talk a little bit about the 1L year. Just wanted to review for you what is law school, which is the first year is a fixed curriculum that is largely similar for everyone around the country, that includes a legal writing component and then core subjects in the law: constitutional, criminal, torts, property, contracts, things you may have heard of. After this first year of law school, you pretty much rotate into largely electives. There are a few things that may be mandatory at this or that school. There may be some distribution requirements, but the second and third year of law school is when, if you're interested in health law, you get to take your health law classes. If you're interested in sexism in the law, you get to take those classes. And you also get to take other classes where you're exploring the area. There's no such thing as a major in law school. People don't declare a major after their first year of law school. You're free to take whatever classes you want your second and third year. Many law schools have something called a concentration. Some might have a certificate where people, by grouping 3 health law classes together or an immigration clinic and 2 immigration classes together, may graduate with a concentration in something. However, this is neither required nor is it uniform. Everybody that graduates from law school gets a JD, a Juris Doctor. Nobody gets a JD in immigration law or a JD in government law. It is the same degree for everybody, distinct from your undergraduate degree, which will be a BA in government or a BS in engineering. So this is a utilitarian, practice-oriented degree where everybody's degree is identical. The law school activities that you would engage in are different bar associations, affiliated bar associations with the community. Could be your LGBTQ bar association, your real estate bar So it could be based on affinity, it could be based on interest, the intellectual property bar. Many law schools will support law students. I know ours does. Many law schools will support law students in joining and participating in the activities of those different bar associations. And then there's also internal law school activities, different clubs, everything from the National Lawyers Guild to campus chapters of the ACLU, and things like that. So I think we'll stop there and let's go to questions. And I see some questions have already started.
Yeah, would it be helpful? I mean, Laura and Nima, can you see the questions or should I?
I can see the questions.
Okay.
So I'd be happy to speak for, I just read the question about, where was it? Or Nima's comment about merit aid. I want to speak a little bit about my experience because I feel like this is perhaps relevant to this question. So I chose the law school that I chose in part because I received almost a full scholarship to attend. And so there was certainly like a cost benefit analysis that each of you should undertake. And as Nima said, looking at geographically where you want to land and sort of combining that analysis with the potential for merit aid, right? So for me, what made sense was I paid for Smith College myself. I wasn't too keen on taking out $150,000 of loans so that I could move to DC or Boston to pay full price for a law school. I knew that I wanted to stay in Western Massachusetts. I have roots here. I knew I wanted to stay involved with my local community. So for me, it was a really nice match between, paying very little for law school and ultimately staying in the community that I wanted to stay in. I will say that merit aid is not going to be as robust as the top schools, right? This is something that some of the more regional schools do to recruit top talent. And so I would say consider it. And I would say that as far as debt load, it's certainly worth considering. For me, it was a decision between, do I want a really big law school name and with a lot of debt with it? Or, is this going to serve the purpose of preparing me to practice in Massachusetts, which is where I know I want to stay? So I will say that merit aid is tied in with GPA and LSAT. And so that's just another reason to really look pretty closely at opportunities to study for, prepare for, and really knock it out of the park on the LSAT. And I will say that, for instance, the institution where I currently work now, they have a really, for people who are within, I think, the top 10% or so of LSAT scores, there's an Oliver Wendell Holmes scholarship where it's completely tuition free. So you receive essentially, aside from fees, a full ride. And so there are trade-offs, of course. Like I went to a regional law school where I knew that the top 3 jurisdictions that it was going to spit me out into would be New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. But because I knew that's where I wanted to land, it really made sense for me. So I would say there are multiple pieces of your analysis that should happen, but realistically in today's day and age, I would say what you're going to pay for is certainly something that you should think carefully about. I wouldn't recommend just making a quick decision to commit to taking out close to $200,000 in loans if you're not totally positive that that's going to spit you out right into where you want to be.
There's some questions that are follow-ups to that. And so concurring with Laura, there's sort of basically 3 categories of aid in law schools. One is your traditional loan-based aid based on you fill out the federal financial aid forms and what you qualify for. Beware though that they're going to count a parental contribution until I think it's age 27 now. So even if your parents are like, okay, we paid for college, or we helped pay for college, or we co-signed loans to college, and sort of now you're on your own, which is not atypical, they're still going to be calculating your need based on parental tax returns if you have parents or guardians who can supply that. So that's a tricky thing, because at that point, you're a young adult, you're going to graduate school, you may well be responsible for it yourself. So merit aid is real. And what is it? So that's one category, is the loan-based aid. Merit aid is where the schools are in hot competition with each other to raise their LSAT and GPA metrics, because unfortunately, for better or for worse, and this is a topic for another time, everybody seems to care a lot about US News and World Report and where you rank in US News and World Report. So, and a big chunk of that ranking is attributable to the entering LSAT scores and GPAs. So the higher a school can push those numbers, the more they will try and essentially subsidize students at the high end of those numbers for their school to attend. So similar to Laura, I was offered at Northeastern at that time, they didn't have full tuition scholarships, but I was offered a 50% tuition scholarship that was completely merit-based. It wasn't need-based, but it reduced significantly my need to take out loans to go to law school, so that I graduated with a much smaller debt that was manageable and that I was able to pay off. The other advantage, potentially, so there's the other advantage potentially is that you know that you're starting sort of a little bit ahead of the starting block. You've got your Smith education behind you. So there was one question about Smith and how the rigor compares. And I think Smith is actually excellent preparation for law school. I can tell you in the 3 years that I've worked here at Northeastern and the years that I was at Harvard before that, I never met a Smith student who did not perform well in law school across a variety of interest areas. Smith students have both the professional approach, the writing skills and the reasoning skills, and the collegiality and collaboration skills, which are very key to being good lawyers. And I have seen successful Smith students who graduated at the top of their class at Northeastern and graduated at the middle of the class. I've actually never seen a Smith student do poorly in law school. That is just something that I will say for sure, and I've been in this setting for a long time. Somebody asked about, should you apply to law schools that are out of reach regarding GPA and LSAT scores? Absolutely apply to your dream schools. You have a dream school that's a stretch for you based on your LSAT score, apply for it, go for it. There are lots of reasons you might want to go to a top-ranked, nationally known school. One reason might be there are some fields, and Laura and I were reviewing some of these yesterday, there are a couple of fields where unless you go to what's considered in the law a T14 or a top 20 or Ivy League plus school, there are two narrow areas that are hard to break into. One of them is academia. If you are interested in legal academia, you want to be a law professor, you probably want to go to a top 10 law school. You can see who those are in US News and World Report. They're the usual suspects. They're, Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Chicago. You think you want to be a law professor? Now, it's not impossible to be a law professor if you go to another law school. We have a couple of law professors on our faculty here from other types of law schools, but you usually don't go straight into academia if you don't go to a top law school. So if you want to go straight into academia, do not step past go, do not collect 200, do not go to any law firms or, do tons of practice. Go to a top Ivy League law school, and there's certain ones that pump out more academics than others. Now, there are other paths to academia, as I mentioned, which is, for example, practicing in a particular field. Let's say you practice maybe you are a lawyer at the NAACP for 15 years bringing voting rights cases. Then you are a voting rights expert. Then a faculty that's looking to hire a voting rights expert is going to hire you, and you're going to be a faculty member hired from practice. It's just that road to academia is far fewer people than the people that get hired straight out of law school and straight out of clerkships because of their pure academic credentials. So that's one reason to look at, like, okay, no matter how much it costs, I'm going to the very top law school I can get into. The other reason is there's something called a postgraduate judicial clerkship. I did a postgraduate judicial clerkship coming from Northeastern. People do postgraduate judicial clerkships coming from Western New England and from pretty much every law school in the country. There are judges in every region, every district, every state, and in the federal government that hire postgraduate judicial clerks, and that is a great job. However, there is one court that does not hire outside of a certain small group of schools. And I don't think that it's going to be a surprise for you if I tell you that that court is the United States Supreme Court. So if you have aspirations of being a law clerk after graduation for the United States Supreme Court, there are basically 5 law schools that feed into that position. And if you can go to one of those law schools and be a Supreme Court clerk and have an impact on our, national polity in that way, go for it. We are there for you. Smithies at the Supreme Court. We want that. However, if that's not your aspiration, if you don't want to work in the Supreme Court as a law clerk, you don't need to go to those types of law schools and get into a lot of debt unless you have other reasons that you want to do that. The other way people finance law school, of course, is a lot of people do actually work part-time in their 2L and 3L years. It is actually very difficult to work part-time during your 1L year of law school. I've seen people do it. It is very challenging. The 1L year is brutal. However, an increasing number of students successfully juggle working part-time in their 2L and 3L years with going to law school. And often they're working part-time for legal organizations. Maybe it was somewhere where they did an internship. Maybe it was somewhere where they did a summer externship or something like that. But then they end up working part-time for that legal organization, that law firm, and they often graduate into that job. So again, that's a reason to look at what are the regional opportunities. Will I be able to find a decent part-time job in the place where I'm going to law school if that's something you want to do? My spouse, who's also a Smithy and a lawyer, worked for a law firm the summer after her first year of law school, and then for the 2 and 3L years worked 20 hours a week for that same law school, and that helped to almost defray entirely the cost of law school at that time. So that's another thing to consider in terms of payment.
Yeah. And another thing to consider, if you're a non-traditional student or that sounds like it's way too much for you to balance, there are certain schools that have part-time and evening programs, right? So as Nima said, law school full-time is usually 3 years. For instance, Western New England has a part-time evening program where I have students who are, in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are working full-time and attending classes at night, and they're able to complete law school over the course of 4 years instead of 3. So if that's a consideration for you, those things exist. If it seems like too much to be doing full-time, if you need to also work, think about that as an option as well.
Yes, you'll always find second career folks in law school, even though the average age of law students right now is somewhere between 24 and 25. I think the average students take about one year off between law school and college, or sometimes 1 to 3 years. But there are a significant number, rising numbers of students that are second career people, or maybe did teaching for a few years or went to graduate school and shifted gears as I did. There was a question about when to ask for letters, junior year or senior year. Laura, I don't know what you think, but I would think senior year. I would think senior year is the right time to ask for letters because the faculty have a fuller record
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that no matter where you are at Smith, you should be developing relationships with professors regardless, so that when you get to the point where you're deciding to ask for a recommendation, these relationships exist, right? So I think, yes, junior year, certainly meet with professors, talk to them about your ideas. But senior year, that's when I would ask for the recommendations. And something that I did when I was going through that process was I made sure that everyone I was asking had a copy of my resume. And if they had any questions about what I was seeking from them, I answered them, right? So I think part of it is making sure that your recommenders know you well and know your background and know your passions, because when you have a recommendation letter that is really superficial, it kind of comes across that way. So I think it's just really the main thing, aside from when to ask, is to develop those relationships and to have people who can speak to specific things about you, specific things about your relationship with them, your work ethic, your abilities. That piece is important to start building no matter what. But yes, senior year, once you have more of, like Nima said, you have a fuller record, you have more that they can base their recommendations off of.
And you're closer to your decision-making process too about where you want to go, so you can have a deeper conversation with your faculty members. So I do think that's exactly right. You always want to be working on developing relationships with faculty. We know that's harder right now in the virtual space that you're all living and learning. So any opportunities that exist to do that, try. And we just wanted to say too throughout this is not going to last forever. And there will be opportunities for us to be together in space together again, to get to know folks in a different way. I wanted to come back another time to the question of, should I be applying to my stretch schools? Like, should I apply to places that the GPA and LSAT score above mine? Not only should you, one thing I should say to you is that wait lists at law schools move. It's actually different, very different from the undergraduate situation. Wait lists at law schools move, and they keep moving throughout the summer. Why is that? That is largely because a lot of people who apply to law school are also applying to other graduate programs. They're actually still in the process, sometimes, of figuring out which direction they want to take their skills and talents. So it's not uncommon for people to apply to like law school, but also business school. Oh, and when I see where I get in, that's when I'll decide. Or law school and also a graduate program. Ditto for that. So it's very common for people to even, accept a place nominally at a law school, and then by June say, you know what, I've decided to go to business school, or I got a promotion in my job and I'm going to stay in my job. So law school wait lists move quickly, and we see a lot of shifting around during the summer. And there are social circumstances and societal circumstances that cause wait lists to move. The pandemic caused wait lists to move. This year, we lost a number of our incoming students to Harvard Law School because they were on the wait list for Harvard. And Harvard lost about 10% of their incoming class with people deferring because of the pandemic. So it is not out there. I applied to my Reach school, which at the time I thought my dream school was a school in New York City, and I was waitlisted at that school. And so I will say I was waitlisted at NYU Law School, but I didn't stay on the wait list because I got this scholarship from Northeastern, and I decided to take the scholarship from Northeastern. But I had another friend on that same wait list in that same year, and she got off the wait list. So those wait lists move. So if you're determined, apply to your stretch schools. Smith is a very, very strong brand in the academic community, and particularly in the law school world. And so they'll know that you're prepared. So at that point, it just becomes a numbers game. Who's coming in, who's going out, how many more spaces do they have? But Smith will serve you well and will help you even as you're sitting on a wait list. It'll, because if they're have people on wait lists, they don't want to take risks on an unknown quantity, and they know the Smith quantity. Smith students, as we mentioned earlier, historically do extremely well in law school. There's a question about aspects to consider before you make the commitment to pay for and attend law school. I think we talked about that, whether you want to or need to work part-time, whether you have familial support or are going to need to take out loans, whether the school has merit aid and would be willing to recruit you because your numbers sit above what their average numbers are. There's specific questions about the LSAT. Laura, if a student plans to take the LSAT in October and January, can they send their application in before their second LSAT?
That's a question that I would have to ask my admissions dean. I'm not sure of the mechanics of that off the top of my head, but I can find an answer, certainly.
Yeah, we can definitely get the answers to that. I would need to talk to my admissions dean because some of that actually changes somewhat year to year. I do know that at least at our law school, and I'm pretty sure this is routinely true, we only look at the highest score. Even if we see the other scores, the only score we care about is the highest score. The only score we have to report to US News and World Report is the highest score. We don't have to report anything. Somebody could take the LSAT 10 times and bomb it and have one really high score. Even if we see all those scores, we're letting the student in based on the high score, and we're submitting those high scores to all the different licensing and ranking agencies. So you do not hurt yourself. It's very different from the college admission process that has a lot of other kind of loopholes and considerations around testing. With law school, it's one test, it's the LSAT, and it's the highest score that counts. There are other considerations if you're going to take it a lot of times. It's like sunk time in studying, you got to pay to take the test. But if you want to keep going till you get the score you want, you can go for it.
And like I said earlier, this is a test that rewards studying. Even if you're someone who does really well on standardized tests, it's going to be really hard just to show up and knock it out of the park because there are ways to study for it, and they're looking for specific ways. They're looking for you to analyze things in specific ways. So as I said, it's something that's worth investing a little bit of time and effort in studying for, even if you test really well and perhaps you did really well on the SATs or whatever, without much studying. The LSAT is a little bit different. I'm someone who tried to take the LSAT the first time without studying very much. It didn't go so hot. But then I was able to study, on my lunch break over the course of a summer. And I brought the second time I brought my LSAT score up like very significantly. So I think it is to your benefit to take it multiple times if you need to, but also invest the time up front in understanding the components of the test, studying for each of the components, and doing practice tests, quite honestly. I think that's a really good way to start to prepare.
It seems like we're in some final moments where folks, if they have any questions that did not get asked, and I think that we're a small enough group, if you either want to just type in your question or you can even raise your hand and shout it out. We do have a few more minutes for questions.
I have something that I just want to speak to really quickly that's kind of a holistic point. I talked a little bit about how I graduated in 2009, and it was kind of similar to right now in that there weren't a lot of jobs. And so I'd say, if you're planning on going to law school, one of the things you can do is find something you're passionate about, and whether or not you're compensated for it, put some time into that, okay? So for me, that was, I volunteered to start a community garden in my hometown, and I ran it for a few years. And then when I applied to law school, they were like, that's really cool, let's talk about that. So having something that you're passionate about, having some sort of civic or community engagement, volunteer work, or just aligning yourself with an issue that you care deeply about is something that could make your application stand out as well, right? Because it just shows that Smithy level of commitment and interest and dedication. And so in my opinion, even if you can't find a way to get paid for what you love immediately, find ways to engage with the things you're passionate about, and those will sort of speak to your character as you enter law school. And I think that's generally good advice, but I think for the law school application process, if you have some things on your resume that make you a little bit unique or interesting, that's certainly something that, as someone who would review applications, it might make you stand out a little bit. So I know that Smithies do that anyway, but I just think that it's very valuable to have those investments present as you prepare.
That seems like a fantastic place to wind up, actually. And I'm mindful of time for Laura and Nima. So let me just close and say, number one, again, thank you to both of you for your time and your advice. There's so much in this hour. I was frantically writing notes too, so this is fantastic. And thank you to all the students too for listening in on this. I hope this information was helpful. I hope for those of you that are in process, this gave you some clarification and some verification. For those of you who are maybe considering this path, hopefully this is useful for you as you're thinking about next steps. I think we're going to have some follow-up information that we're going to be able to share with everyone who attended here. That will be sending out to you, if not later today, tomorrow. I see some contact information being shared here. So any last words, or should we wrap it up?
I can't resist the opportunity to say a last word. Can I say a last word? And then actually, if Laura wants to too, I just want to say how qualified and talented you all are. There were a number of questions about, does Smith prepare me well for the rigors of law school, or should I be applying to schools that might be a stretch for me? Those questions, again, I'm telling you, I now have 25 years of experience in this profession. I have 10 years of experience working at law schools, two very different law schools, Harvard Law School and Northeastern Law School, and I have never seen a Smith student do poorly in law school. That is just, and I've now probably worked with several dozen Smith students over the years at both Harvard and Northeastern, as well as Smith students who've gone to a bunch of other law schools. I know Laura has this too, who have contacted me just as an alum mentor. Smithies and the law, it's a good match. It's just a really good match. So go forth with that confidence and know that you have a veritable siblinghood of alums to back you up on this career path, and be in touch with us.
Yeah, I agree. I second everything Nima said. The first time she found out that I stepped into this role, she emailed me off the bat when she found out that I went to Smith. And the first time I met her, this was before COVID, she came up and gave me a big hug and said, anything you need, I'm here for you. You have an alumni network, and I think you should use it. And please feel free to reach out to us. I get questions from Smith students, graduates. I always take the time to answer. I think Nima does too.
Absolutely. It's my #1 priority.
Great.
Yeah, and it gives me, honestly, seeing all of your faces on my screen right now, it gives me so much hope. So.
And hang in there. You guys are going to get through this. We know these are hard times.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Jason.
Thank you everybody for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.